the evening sky. To whom do these celestial steeds belong? When you appear to us like gods on high, what brings you here to mystify?
Welcome to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Back with us today is Thomas Fusco. He is the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. This is a most intriguing book. Thomas has devoted over 20 years in developing an approach to finding his idea of the theory of everything. There's so much to discuss in just 1 hour, and so without further ado, welcome to the show. Thomas, thanks for being back with us.
Hey, Kate, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'll tell you, I reread your book this week. It's better the second time, much better, because I think the initial ideas you were trying to bring finally sunk into this, dense skull, and now I'm starting to really agree with you. Let me just read the subtitle of your book. It's The Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality, Merging Science, the Spiritual, and the Supernatural. That's sort of a big order, Thomas.
It certainly is. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm getting over a cold.
Okay.
So if my voice sounds funny, that's why.
Oh, no, it sounds really good here. What I liked most about your book was it's different. As you stated, there's a lot of information on various, we'll just go to the paranormal for right now. Paranormal events, occurrences that you can pick up. What you do in your book is actually, one, define paranormal, and then two, put it into categories so that it can be investigated more closely. And let me just for the sake of the audience listening, you define paranormal as events that are non-local. Is that correct?
Yes, it's like if we were to take an example of like I call a disembodied voice.
Okay.
And let's call that a paranormal voice as opposed to a normal voice.
Mm-hmm.
When we really sit down and study it carefully, we find that the physical effect of the voice is the same in both instances. We definitely have a compression of the air column that creates waves that hit our ears or, a microphone recorder and results in a normal voice. The difference is that in a normal voice, we have a set of vocal cords, mine at the moment quite tenuously connected.
But doing well.
Solidly connected to the air column that's being vibrated. And in a paranormal voice, we really don't have any apparent physical cause that is locally connected to that air column that's being vibrated. The cause seems to literally emerge out of thin air. And so ultimately what we have is what we call in physics a non-local causality, or non-locality for short. And to me, when I look at every single type of paranormal phenomena, what makes it paranormal is this same common non-local cause to the effect that's being witnessed.
Yeah, and then the first, and you have 4 categories. In the first one, and listen to the listeners out there, get the book, read it, because there's so much background to this that unfortunately we don't even begin to have enough time to go over. But the first grouping of paranormal events is, there exists a means by which information can be gathered, stored, and transmitted outside normal space-time. So I guess, again, we need a definition of normal space-time, because that's very important. That's where the causality, the local causality, occurs in what we would consider local space-time. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And what I've done is I've actually gone back and looked at what we know about reality in the simplest, almost childlike way of perceiving it. And so if we look at the very basics of what normal space-time comprises, it is the realm of time and space, matter and energy, or in other words, everything that is physical. Energy is physical as well as matter. And the geometric structure of space-time, Einstein, proved to us that it's also physical. In order for paranormal effects to take place the way they do, we have to accept the idea that the information that we're actually seeing materialize is being stored and conveyed in a way that is independent of and outside of normal physical reality. And it drops in to physical reality and materializes, and that's when we experience it and witness it.
And that's what you call the supergeometry effect.
Absolutely. This actually is a very old idea, the concept that there is a body of information that exists above and outside of space-time but is directly connected to it. And in fact, space-time emerges from this body of information. I think Plato was the first one that really gave it a structure. He called it forms.
Yeah.
The Bible mentions it in the Old Testament. It's known as the wisdom of God. In the New Testament, the Greek word is used logos in the first paragraph of the Gospel of John, which is the exact same concept. It's been called cosmic consciousness, universal mind. If we go into the 20th century, we have several prominent physicists offering their own version of it. David Bohm called it implicate order, which gave rise to the explicate order of space-time, matter, and energy. David Finkelstein called it coherent superpositions. John Wheeler called it pre-geometry. Edgar Casey called it akasha. I gave it the name supergeometry because I felt it was a bit more tangible because it has the word geometry. People can kind of wrap their head around that. And super because it's a common term that we use in science to describe a super system of something else, a higher system. And so, yes, this is what the concept of supergeometry represents.
And so you can see where the other categories of paranormal events fall into that, because your second category would be matter and energy can be influenced and manipulated by some unknown mechanism, the source of which is non-physical and which originates outside normal space-time. That would account then for translocation and transmutation. That's pretty interesting. That also, I should point out to the audience that you just don't come up with this as a theory. You do have this backed up pretty conclusively in your book, and you don't just say, "Oh, this may be what happens." You really back up your theory with some very good examples.
Yeah, it's been observed, and of course I'd agree that the supergeometric theory, which is what my theory is called, is very different than most anything that people have heard from other sources. Most quote-unquote theories of the supernatural involve taking known data, known facts, and just putting them together in a different order, like rearranging the puzzles, so to speak. But what distinguishes my work is that it is a scientific theory, in that it actually makes predictions about aspects of reality that are experimentally testable. It goes beyond what is already known to make specific experimental predictions about unknown aspects of reality. And some of those experimental results have already been achieved.
And could you give us one example? Does any come to mind? Or
Yes, absolutely. There is a physicist, a very, very smart electrical engineer, has done a lot of work, unique work in paranormal phenomena. His name is David Roundtree. And he's done some very unusual experiments that his results that he's gotten were predicted by my theory. Specifically, that in the instances where we have an emergence of a paranormal event in our local space, that we would see, accompanied with this, an expansion of the fabric of space-time at that particular emergence point. And this is going to create certain effects in the local space. Some of them we already know. We just didn't know why they were, like changes in barometric pressure and the emergence of electromagnetic fields seemingly out of midair. But some of the unexpected predictions have to do with the emission of photons, and even more amazingly, and this is where it really relates to the field of UFOs, that it also predicts the emergence of an independent gravitational field separate from the gravitational field of the Earth. And also it predicts that there would be a measurement of time dilation at the location of these emergence points. And all this has been experimentally validated.
Wow, that's a lot to wrap your mind around, as they say, because really gravity is, I think that's the fly in the ointment. That's the one thing that's been very, very difficult for physicists to explain and to include in their own theories of everything. That's Einstein developed, thought of it as a warping of space-time as opposed to a force in and of itself. And gravitons have never been discovered, although recently they have come up with the Higgs boson. But gravity is really, it's a very difficult thing to explain. Everybody knows what it is, but to actually know why it exists is rather difficult.
Well, definitely gravity was one of the keys to my theory, because we have been attacking gravity for over a century now, based on the conclusions of Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell in the 1800s, both brilliant men. But their assumption is that gravity must be a force, very much like electromagnetism. But every time physics has tried to approach it that way, we've always been frustrated. Gravity has been the bone in science's throat in so many different ways. Even Einstein was unable to mathematically solve his unified field theory equations because he could not express gravity mathematically in 4 dimensions. When we try to reconcile relativity with quantum physics, we come up with gravity as a problem. We can't overcome it. Our standard model of the universe, capital S, capital M, which physicists use to describe the fundamental particles of the universe and their interactions, have absolutely no expression for gravity. And as you mentioned, we've never been able to determine whether there was a graviton or not. So my conclusion is that we're simply looking at gravity with the wrong paradigm. And even the Higgs boson, as you mentioned, we still have big problems with that. Well, if you read the reports very carefully, you'll notice that all they know for certain is they've discovered a particle that they believe is a boson. But they have big problems in trying to demonstrate that it actually is the quote-unquote Higgs boson. So there's problems with that as well. I guess Kate, when I try to convey to people like a real simple model of how I believe gravity works, think about making a meatball.
Okay, that's easy.
All right. You pick up a handful of ground beef and you press it in your hands, and you make a meatball. Mm-hmm. Well, imagine the meatball being a physical object of any kind and any size. Imagine the force that you're using to compress it into shape is gravity. Okay. And imagine your hands being the curvatures of space.
Okay.
It works actually in reverse of what conventional thinking says. And it's very consistent with what they call a Kaluza-Klein theory. What this does, though, it solves many problems for us. It eliminates our need to find a graviton. It tells us that matter is not the cause of gravity and the bending of space, but it is within the bending of space in which matter materializes. And the body of evidence that allows us to see this in real time is paranormal phenomena. So when my theory made these predictions that say all reality is materialized information within the curvatures of space. When we see paranormal effects emerge, like apparitions or disembodied voices, this theory says we actually have a bubble of space-time forming within which information enters into space-time and materializes. And when we tested that, we found the results that model predicts.
Wow. Oh, Thomas, we're going to have to take a quick break, which is probably a good thing. Our audience can take a few minutes to digest that particular meatball. That was a tough one. But a very good example, really. Kate Valentine here. I'm speaking to Thomas Fusco on 1160 WVNJ. Thomas is the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. If you have any thoughts or questions, please post them now at AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Afterwards, to get more information or a copy of Thomas's book, go to CosmicVeil.com. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Thomas Fusco. He is the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. Thomas's book is probably going to elicit some questions, and if you have any, now is the time to post them on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Just before the break, Thomas, you were explaining how some of these supernatural or paranormal effects would come through and how they might be detected. I was just wondering, sort of with computers today, with this cloud technology, where you have all this information floating along in the atmosphere, and you only need the proper receiver to pick up any information you want. It sounds almost like that's analogous to supergeometry and the space-time bubble that we're living in.
It's actually a very good analogy. And one of the things I suggest for people to think about is printing out a picture from your computer, where the data that comprises what will ultimately become the physical printout of the photograph resides on your hard drive. It's not visible. It's not really... It's barely measurable, in fact. If we took apart a hard drive, we wouldn't be able to recognize it. Even if we were able to read the patterns of information off that hard drive, we would still need the mechanism of the computer to be able to convert it into physical reality. And what my books does is, number one, it does say that there is such a hard drive to the universe. And number two, it describes the fundamentals of the computer that prints this information into physical reality.
I really think you have an excellent point. And again, the second time I read the book, the more realistic it started to sound. Because there's so much information that seems to pop out literally out of nowhere. For example, let's just take an example of the ancient alien theory, that our ancestors were able to build these really incredible structures without any sort of history of where they got the information from. For example, in the pyramids, they have all these hieroglyphics of everything in life, how to milk cows, how to build a boat, how to do all this, but there's no hieroglyphics as to how to build a pyramid. And you wonder if perhaps those and other people like Jules Verne or Edgar Cayce weren't somehow or other equipped with a receiver that could have stretched out past the space-time bubble and drawn down that information from above. And I think you, in your book, almost state that this could be a possibility.
Well, the way I like to look at it is from a scientific perspective. When we study a system, we first lay out the laws and principles which govern and determine the nature of that system. And when we begin to study the subsystems of that system, we understand that the subsystems, although they may grow in complexity, they never violate or work outside of the laws and principles that govern the greater system.
Right.
So if we take a look at my definition of the universe, yes, I actually do have a definition for the universe. It is, I call it an expression of materialized and materializing information. That's the universe. And take us human beings, for example. Our brains are a subset of that greater universe. Now, if we take a look around us, anybody in the listening audience is surrounded by objects that are materializations of information that originate somewhere in the human brain, in the human consciousness. We materialize all kinds of information in ways that wouldn't occur naturally in the normal natural environment. So our brains must work somewhere along the same fundamental laws and principles that literally governed how the universe arose in the Big Bang out of a quantum singularity. It would be unreasonable to think that our brains materialize information on some sort of a different set of principles than governs the greater universe in which it is a part. When we begin to look at it that way, we begin to break down these traditional barriers between certain fields of study and find out that, yes, if we pick up a piece of information that's yet materialized, and we vocalize that, we've actually materialized that information.
Well, that was your fourth category under paranormal events. You say that there exists a non-physical pattern or matrix on a grand scale, which causes seemingly unrelated physical things and or events are in fact related through their alignment and resonance with this non-physical matrix. The existence of the matrix can be recognized by the occurrence of, well, this was a little bit off the topic, I'm sorry, by the occurrence of meaningful coincidence, such as synchronicity. But still, you also point out that most animals adopt to the environment, whereas the human species causes the environment to adopt to us. And again, that would be a reflection of the universe as we know it, sort of adopting to the supergeometry that you're describing.
Yes, in other words, something about our human brain transcends the natural environment, which is the result of materialization, and actually enters into a realm to where the information itself materializes. In other words, we are creators. And so we've actually transcended that barrier between created and creator, so to speak.
Okay.
And I think that's something that when you look at it from a scientific viewpoint, it's very hard to ignore, unless you're, like many scientists want to do, they just say, well, we don't play with biology or we don't play with psychology, and, they bury their heads in the sand when physics is the science of studying everything physical, and our brains are certainly a physical thing.
Well, I tell you, Thomas, that's another meatball for our audience to chew over, and we're going to take a quick break and let them think about that. This is Kate Valentine, and I am speaking to Thomas Fusco. We are on 1160 WVNJ. Thomas is the author of Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. You can post your thoughts or questions on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com, after the show for more information, or to get a copy of this most intriguing book with its most intriguing theories, go to CosmicVeil.com. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Thomas Fusco. He is the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. If you have questions or comments for Thomas, please post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, you can go to Thomas's website, CosmicVeil.com. Tom, just before the break, you were talking about scientists and science in general being a little bit leery of delving into the so-called paranormal, but you really poke fun of them and you bite into orthodox science, because the more you get into quantum mechanics, the more they delve into what they have termed weirdness. For example, virtual photons, entanglement, the infamous two-slit experiment. They're really starting to verge into your studies as opposed to you going into theirs.
Well, here's one of the milestones that I believe is one of the most important in my work, is that because it is a scientific theory, I'm not so much in a position where I've put out in a concept, a theory, and then I have to try to draw established science into my arena, so to speak, so they'll come and play. With this theory, I could basically go into their arena, go onto their home turf, play by their rules with their home field advantage, and, so to speak, give them a black eye.
Yeah, you have, too. It's really funny. Because, and let me see here, you really did poke quite a lot of fun at them, and I don't think that they can back down. And I'll tell you, some of the physicists that you quoted before, such as John Wheeler, these men are outstanding physicists. These are, he was the developer of the black hole, or at least the term black hole, if I'm not mistaken. But they're very and David Bohm. Einstein's theory was always just a little off to me too, with not being able to sort of bring gravity into his theory of relativity, and Bohm did bring it in. And I forget, you also quoted this fellow Kaluza, which introduced that fifth element, and I think you should bring that up at this point with the gravitational, and why Kaluza was not entirely accepted by the physics community.
Well, what Kaluza did, he was also working in coordination with Einstein, with some of the math that Einstein was dealing with his unified field theory, which he never was able to fully express mathematically. Well, what Kaluza decided to do was to add a fifth coordinate to the equation, a coordinate that was outside of local space-time, something besides the coordinates of height, width, depth, and time. And so he injected this into Einstein's equations, worked the math, at the very end subtracted it out, so all he would have left was the resultant, which was the world of the physical. And lo and behold, he was the only person that ever balanced Einstein's equations. He came to believe later in his career that gravity was a non-local phenomena. In other words, it was an effect that the source of which was outside of space-time. And that's very revolutionary. But as I mentioned before, it does tend to solve a number of problems that is currently facing physics today, and also answers some of the questions that we have about paranormal phenomena and even ufology.
Well, also with ufology, too, one of the aspects of it is that these craft seem to appear and disappear, and will, just certainly don't seem to exhibit a lot of the physical constraints that our aircraft do. And so possibly that does place them into a universe like they're coming into ours from a different universe, from one with that does exhibit supergeometry, or perhaps they've learned how to control it and use it.
Well, what I maintain is this, and as you may know, I kind of separate the study of these fields into two divisions, like a police department. I think there's criminology, which is involved with whodunit, and then there's the forensics. And unfortunately, all these fields are predominated by criminologists. Everybody wants to know who's done it, and they focus on that. I focused on the forensics, the actual physics of how something can occur, rather than who did it and why and what the motives were. So if we take a look at ufology and just for a moment, and I'm not saying they're invalid, but just for a moment, send the aliens and the men in black and all that into a waiting room somewhere. Okay. And on the paranormal end, send all the ghosts and goblins and demons and dead people and whatever into their own waiting room and take a look at the actual physical phenomena itself. And when you do that, you find that there is a great similarity between the two, that the actual physical effects that we observe share many of the same characteristics in ufology as it does in the paranormal. The most important difference, though, is that the paranormal generally happens on a human scale. It's something that can happen in local space that's small enough for us to research and study. And it also happens in a consistent way that we know that if we focus our instrumentation on what's known as a quote-unquote haunted site, it's very much like focusing our telescopes on the solar disk. We know that eventually we're going to see a solar flare. And in the paranormal, in a haunted site, we know we're eventually going to see a paranormal effect. This is very different than ufology, which is less predictable and happens on a much larger scale. But I firmly believe that if we focus our study, as Nikola Tesla said, we need to focus on the non-physical aspects of reality. He said, we'll make more progress in 10 years than in the entire human history prior. If we focus on studying these paranormal effects and we understand the physics, I believe we can build technology based on them that will do everything that we see UFOs do.
Well, it's possible. Also, we had a guest on a while back, Mr. Robert Schroeder, and he was talking about a multiverse where there are, and I'm sure you're familiar with the term, where there's bubbles of various universes, sort of almost like bubbles in a soap bubble mix. And in between these universes, there's a space that he calls the bulk. And he sort of postulated that perhaps these little craft, whatever they are, fly in and out of the bulk, and inside the bulk you could pick up any time or any place. You just have to know where to come in and out of it, and that's almost as very similar to what you're thinking about as well.
Well, there's one real big difference. Actually, there's a couple big differences.
Mm-hmm.
We could spend another several shows just talking about.
Oh, I know. Get the book out there if you're listening and you're interested. This doesn't even begin to brush the surface. But go ahead, Tom. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, that's okay. Mm-hmm. The multiverse is a philosophical speculation. It is not a scientific theory. The couple possible predictions that a brain-type multiverse, which is what you're describing, could be verified on any way, has already been disproven and discredited. It makes absolutely no testable predictions, and consequently it is a philosophical speculation. And I maintain that there is no such thing as a multiverse. It is an attempt to explain effects that we have run out of material causes to account to in our own universe by borrowing material from an adjacent universe. And my theory not only doesn't allow for that, but offers much more sound explanations that are also experimentally testable and are consistent with known observations.
But just for 1 second, let's just assume that there was a multiverse, but then supergeometry would be over that as well, right? If there should be such a thing.
All we would need to explain everything that we observe
mm-hmm.
is a single superphysical superstructure to our own single-dimensional universe. There is no need to consider a multiverse. The questions that are not presented correctly in the discussion with the multiverse are so dizzying that it becomes, when you really start looking into it, Kate, it almost becomes comical how unworkable it is. For example, one of the ideas of a multiverse is an alternate reality spawns off of every quantum probability. Well, just think of a penny sitting on a desk and how many quantum states exist in that penny. And then multiply that by the entire volume of the known universe. And then multiply it by the length of a quantum effect over the 14 billion years of history. And each quantum effect has been timed to 12 attoseconds, which is like 1/1,000,000th of a second. And when you start thinking about an alternate universe being spawned by every one of those probabilities, it's almost laughable.
It's a lot of universes.
It's ridiculous. And so, and it doesn't tell us anything about how our own universe was created.
And it would be, because it is not this one, it would be impossible, as you said, to get information from one to the other. But
the multiverse boys hate me. In fact, I had a radio host one time, and I won't mention his name.
Okay.
Is a multiverse aficionado.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually has a religious belief based on it.
Ah.
And he invited me on the show just to make mincemeat out of me.
I see.
And all he did was make a fool of himself.
Okay, well, then that point taken. I won't bring it up. But I'll tell you, as far as religion, too, you do go into spirituality, and I think that's too hot a topic for a UFO show. And you've already poked holes into physics, biology, evolution, and now multiverses. So I'm just going to say, suffice it to say, that you did find your spirituality bolstered as opposed to minimalized by your theory. And that was sort of a nice thing. I was glad to sort of hear that. It was good to know that that there is some hope for us as a society in the end.
What's funny, though, what's very intriguing is that aspect of it, just real briefly,
mm-hmm.
Indicates that there is actually a quote-unquote polarity to reality. In other words, the process of information materializing into physical reality is directional, which means there must be a way to at least partially reverse that direction. And by doing so, we would actually begin to collapse the space-time bubbles that surround all matter. Were we able to do that, we would be able to accomplish things like teleportation and anti-gravity. And it could give us an indication how maybe the ancients moved some of these incredibly huge stones.
I do think that they had access to information that we do not have today. That makes sense to me, very much so. This is Kate Valentine. I'm speaking to Tom Fusco. We're on 1160. We do need to take a short break. We're talking about Thomas's book, The Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. If you have questions or comments, please post them now on our website, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. After the show, please go to his website for more information or to get a copy of this book, CosmicVeil.com. Be right back. Hi, welcome back to the Kate Valentine UFO Show on 1160 WVNJ. Our guest today is Mr. Thomas Fusco. He is the author of Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. If you have comments or questions, this is the time. Post them now, AtlanticCoastUFOs.com. Tom, just before the break, we were talking about information in a sense, and perhaps it's a good time to bring up transluminal information with the entanglement theory. And how does that tie in with your theory at all, or what? Maybe you could describe entanglement a little bit more clearly than I could.
Absolutely. Quantum entanglement, to put it in a very simple term, is the apparent interconnectedness of different quantum states different quantum events where there is no apparent physical connection between the two. The quintessential example of it is what they call a photon teleport. We take a pair of correlated photons. They're balanced in a polarity where one has a, let's say, an up spin and one has a bottom spin or a down spin. And we separate these and shoot them out in opposite directions, traveling at the speed of light away from each other. Now, nothing physical travels faster than light. We know that. That's been proved many, many, many times. And so we'll pass photon A through a magnetic field that reverses its spin. Photon B will immediately reverse its own spin to reestablish the balance in the correlated pair, even if the photons are separated by light years. Now, what quantum physicists have done, and science today is dominated by who I call the quantists, as opposed to years ago when it was dominated by the relativists. The quantum physicists just say, well, this is the way reality is. That's just the way it is, and that's the way it is, and that's just the way it is. Whereas Einstein said that he believed quantum physics was impressive. He said, but I don't believe God rolls dice. That there was an underlying structure that actually connected these various events in the universe, but that we were not able to perceive them. And so those like David Bohm, like John Wheeler, like David Finkelstein, as you mentioned, all well-respected mainstream physicists, they're not fringe or quacks by any stretch of the imagination. We maintain with Einstein that there is a superphysical or non-physical structure that connects everything in the universe, and those connections, those relationships, are taking place above and beyond the physical realm, and as they materialize in the physical reality, they appear to us as being disconnected physically, when in fact they're connected by their underlying superstructure.
Right. Right. And so in that sense, then, since information can travel faster than light, or apparently so, perhaps some of this information could have broken through from the, let's just call it an area of supergeometry into an area of our present world. Is that correct? Or?
Absolutely. Let's take, and you know, one of the features of my work is that it connects so many different things together.
Correct.
In a single model. Let's take a look at remote viewing for a moment.
Good, because that's going to be on next week, so that would be great. Farusha will be with us to discuss that. She's quite good at it, too.
Oh, wonderful. Now, we know that the governments of Russia and the United States did some extensive work. There are people who have apparently inside information on this who maintain that this research is still being conducted. But one of the things that was demonstrated is that this feature works even inside of a Faraday cage, which is set up to block any type of electromagnetic carrier of information. So let's say somebody on the East Coast remote views an accurate event or location from the West Coast. That information cannot be being conveyed to the recipient physically. There is no carrier wave that can conduct that. It has to be coming from a non-physical source, which means that the information of the event or the location being viewed must have all of its information also stored and maintained non-physically. And then it enters into the recipient's mind, and it materializes as an electrochemical pattern. And then the thought exists. It materializes in that person's brain. The event itself, or the remote location, is merely a materialization of the original information that exists above it in a realm above space-time. And therefore, when it travels in a way that bypasses space and time.
Okay. It is, I'll tell you, on first presentation, a little bit difficult to really understand, but when you think about it, it starts to make a tremendous amount of sense. But unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the hour, and what I want to point out, interestingly enough, this is not just an exercise in philosophy, but you also point out how this information can be used in technology and how it can, let me just quote from your book right here. Supergeometry offers the promise of a second, more direct way to alter matter by manipulating the supergeometric patterns from which the very physical structure of reality is derived. Through this, it would be possible to not only shape the cosmic clay, but change its fundamental nature. In other words, we could develop a science and a technology that would make Star Trek look old-fashioned.
Absolutely. If we are to accept the reports, let's say, of miracles, many of them involve the spontaneous transmutation of physical reality into some sort of a different form. Well, that information has to come from somewhere. It certainly doesn't exist in the original materialization because that has the old information in it. Miracle healings would certainly fall under this kind of a category.
And you even mention for example, in Star Trek, where you can just go up to a computer and say, Earl Grey tea, hot, Picard's famous line, and you can then start to develop engines that could, not even engines, just methods of going a little bit faster than space-time.
Well, yes. Were we to reverse the polarity of the space-time bubble that surrounds all physical objects, and we completely collapse that bubble, that object would disappear from space-time. It would dematerialize, and yet every stitch of information from which it was constructed would still exist. Once we perfect the technology, we could create an artificial well of space-time at a different location, interject that information, and that object would rematerialize in a form of teleportation. If we're to interpret Einstein literally, then every coordinate of space-time has its own unique resonant frequency. When we learn to identify that, we might be able to transport objects over vast expanses of space.
I agree with what you're saying, but it is difficult to understand. Has any work been done along those lines?
As far as, we're certainly increasing the range of what we call photon teleport, but the paradigm has to be worked on first. In other words, we need to have people working on this that are working under the assumption that this paradigm is real. And once we get to that point, then I think progress can certainly be made.
Well, I hope someone listening to this show takes you up on that, and perhaps some young person just starting out in research and starts to develop it. It certainly is very, very promising, and I hope they get a copy of your book and start reading it. It's Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality. So, Thomas, thank you really for being here. This is probably one of the most, if not the most, original theory I have heard. And how, just if you could go over with the audience how they get a copy of your book or how they get in touch with you.
You can find out all about the book, various related articles, even an email address that you can contact me, and a link to order the book. Everything can be found at www.cosmicveil, spelled V-E-I-L, cosmicveil.com.
Okay, great. Well, again, thanks for being here. And thanks, as always, to Bill and Dave, who have materialized this show out of seemingly nothing. And thanks to our sponsors, and mostly thank you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday at 1 Ferruccia will be back with us to tell us all about remote viewing, and Thomas was nice enough to have laid the groundwork to understanding why and how remote viewing works. You can hear the show again on podcast or on YouTube, and again this Sunday at 4. So until next week, remember to keep your eye on the sky. We'll see you next week. Bye.